Good morning. Thank you for joining us for today's webcast. Are you managing your cybersecurity risk exposure? Tips for companies growing in the construction space and beyond. We're pleased to be co-hosting today, presented by Ray & Associates, top 100 regional CPA and business consulting firm with offices across Ohio, and our co-host Oswald Companies, one of the nation's largest independent insurance brokerage and risk management firms. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Doug Hauser, and I'll be walking through a few housekeeping items for today's webcast. First, if you have any questions during the presentation, you may enter them in the chat box on your screen. We'll try to answer as many of those as we can as we go, so please do so. We'll also try to answer any remaining questions at the conclusion of today's presentation. However, to be respectful of everyone's time, we may not get to them all, so we will follow up on those post-webcast. If you'd like a copy of today's slide deck, you will find that they are available in the handouts section of the webinar dashboard on your computer screen. So now I'd like to introduce today's presenters, Ty Wittenberg and Lacey Rex, also joined by John Sadlier. Ty is a senior information assurance manager and CMMC registered practitioner on Ray's cybersecurity services team. Ty can be found ensuring organization technology and networks drive business objectives by identifying potential loss events, reducing their frequency and loss magnitude. Ty has more than a decade of industry experience, and I know internally at Ray, value him greatly for his expertise as today's cyber world certainly gets more and more complex, and happy to have him as part of our team. He's been invaluable to a number of my client relationships. Next, Lacey Rex from Oswald Companies. Lacey has over 13 years of experience in the insurance industry, always focused on executive risk coverages. Her knowledge in cybersecurity has earned her international speaking engagement and panel opportunities. Lacey is actively engaged with insurance carriers to craft and create new coverages in manuscript forms. She integrates her product and market knowledge to find solutions for the client's issues that arise daily. So we are very pleased to have Lacey here as the pace of cyber incidents continues to soar, and it allows her to be at the forefront of protecting clients' largest and most valuable assets, and she's got some great insights to share with us today. John is also here from Oswald Companies. John has nearly 20 years of experience working with businesses and nonprofit organizations across the full range of employee benefits and financial services. He specializes in the financial and technical aspects of plan strategy and the implementation of innovative client-specific solutions. As a Central Ohio market leader, he is responsible for growth and profitability of Oswald's comprehensive risk and insurance services throughout the market, as well as directing team management and operations for the firm's full-service Columbus location. So with that, I will pass it over to you, Ty, and look forward to getting started.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This conversation came from a genesis, actually connected by Doug and Jonathan together for us to chat, and it's really great to have Lacey here with us. Cybersecurity risk exposure is, I wouldn't say near and dear to my heart, but I'm passionate about helping protect businesses in regards to that. I would say that, I'm excited to talk to everybody here a little bit about the cybersecurity threat landscape and some things that we can do to ensure that. And I'm positive that Lacey's going to bring it home for us around also identifying some of the risk out there. So can we go ahead and go to the next slide here? So when you think of the cybersecurity landscape, I'm sure everyone has taken a look at the news and heard about the SolarWinds event that impacted not only just the United States government, but Fortune 500 organizations, as well as smaller organizations that utilize SolarWinds as a particular tool in their IT network. Microsoft Exchange has been a hot topic out there as well too, around the exposure to email. And then everybody's so aware of malware, particularly around ransomware, as an event that happens to folks. The main theme that comes into play with a lot of these is business email compromise. It's the biggest threat vector out there for any organization in size, whether you be large or small. A lot of times in construction, you figure you're a smaller local organization, or maybe you're a mid-sized regional organization, and you don't believe that the threat actors are interested in you. Well, the reality is, the long way around sometimes for them to get to the big relationships that you potentially have is to go hunting or fishing for the smaller fish and then swim upstream and get to your particular industry. So the slide you see here, every single day I go out and I take a look at my threat feeds. I'm a member of the InfraGard relationship with the FBI and Department of Homeland Security. I have this mandate feed as well too, where I look out at what's going out there for threat actors. And so as you can see, activity for threat actors is very high. There's a lot of active malwares out there, and it's not necessarily new vulnerabilities that are popping up. They are a lot of old ones, because they realize that organizations may not have some strategies in play in order to ensure that they have the latest and greatest tools, or that they're updating to the latest and greatest operating systems, which leaves you exposed. So as you can see, top 10, I always take a look at top 10 malware, top 10 vulnerabilities that are out there. One that's a freebie for the meeting today is I pushed out to our entire organization, our IT team, and to some of our clients, was around Chrome has multiple vulnerabilities right now, the browser, that if you haven't updated to the most recent version, there's some exposure to. So if you and your organization currently is utilizing Chrome browser, please make sure you go out and do your updates ASAP after this presentation.
Hey,
go
Ty,
ahead.
to that end, real quick, we see a lot of, you hear a lot of this, as you suggest right now, with Microsoft Outlook 365, with Chrome. Companies think, well, hey, maybe all my information is secure. It's in the cloud. Obviously, that's not the case. So maybe you can speak real quickly to some of those vulnerabilities.
That's a great point, right? Thank you for bringing that up, Doug. So a lot of times, when we work with organizations, they'll say, well, I'm moving to the cloud. Well, the cloud as an infrastructure has their security controls in place. What a lot of times folks in the construction industry or other smaller businesses don't realize is that even though you set these additional infrastructures up that might be outside of your organization, and it helps offload some of that responsibility, you still have a responsibility to provide security tools to ensure that you're safeguarding those environments. And so whether you're looking at moving to the cloud or your organization has gotten more organized, and you're focused on Microsoft 365, or you're a construction company that utilizes a lot of mobile tools around iPhones or tablets, and now you're looking at mobile device management, such as the solution that you have in Microsoft with Intune, there are additional controls that you need to put in play to make sure that you are safeguarding not only your networking environment, but that information that's critical to your organization, whether that be around intellectual property, designs, personally identifiable information if you self-insure yourself, or your employees for healthcare. All of those things have regulatory bodies that manage them, and these tools have the capabilities to help you be more safe with those as well too.
And John, real quickly, I want to get a comment from you. You're out in the market, so much. How much of this do you see at the forefront of the thought when you're out in the market with clients and prospective clients? Would you say it's more top of mind now than it was maybe even 6 months or a year ago?
That's a great question, Doug. I would say the perception initially was this is only an issue for larger companies, and we're really seeing it move significantly down market. So it's something that I think Lacey will touch on this in greater detail during her part of the presentation. But it's really, when we look at the construction industry, really the excess liability market is really challenging right now. I would say the auto market is still continuing to be challenging, as is property, and employment practices is the other area that we see. But specific to cyber, it's something that we're seeing. I don't want to steal any of Lacey's thunder, but from limit issues, business interruption issues that are really significant at this point in time, and only growing in concern.
Those are really great points, Jonathan. I would say that, one of the things an organization in the construction industry can do, is prepare for that renewal of their IT if they haven't really had a good managed service provider in place, what some folks would call an MSP. And I could talk a little bit about that now, about what does that look like. So a lot of times when we're involved with the organization and we step in, one of the first things we see, like the screen pops up for you, is asset management. Do you know what technology is touching your network, whether that be laptops, desktop computers, servers, mobile devices? Do you have a good sense of your inventory of those? Do you have a good sense of your software that's critical to your organization that everybody should have? More importantly, what we do around that is, it helps us to identify if there's any form of shadow IT in the network. A lot of times, when you're looking at the business environment, you find how data flows and moves through the organization. I would say to you that a lot of folks don't realize that you may have Microsoft 365 set up in OneDrive and you don't use it, or folks in your organization are utilizing other sources of cloud management, such as Dropbox, such as Google Drive, and they're doing this on their own personal accounts, which adds additional attack surface for threat vectors, but also puts your company at risk of your responsibility to safeguard information. So governance, everybody thinks governance, they always think about regulatory compliance and things like that. I want to distill it down to its essence, which is leadership. Yeah, you might frame, you might do framing, you might be a carpenter, or you might be a general contractor that focuses on plumbing or electrical. The reality is, governance is leadership. And while your expertise may not be in the IT that you utilize, you still have to have some oversight of it internally to make sure that you're safeguarding it. So understanding what regulatory compliances that you need to have out there is critical for you to kind of design what we're going to talk about next here, which is your risk assessment and your strategy around that. Doug and I have a particular client that we know and very close to us that had an incident here with the ransomware response. One of the most critical things that any organization could put into play would be an incident response or a disaster recovery plan, specifically around business continuity. This particular contractor lost a year's worth of financial data through the ransomware and was locked out, had not gone through the exercises of a disaster recovery plan or talked to their managed service provider around their data backups, which they found were insufficient at this particular point. Not only from the loss exposure of the data, but when you talk about lost time, which you really can't put a true defined monetary number on, but you can put money, you can put a dollar and cents on credit protection that you had to provide for your employees. Hiring a team such as Ray and Associates Cyber Services team, or one that Lacey and Jonathan and them recommend to come in and do your incident response for you if you have your cyber insurance. Those things start to add up. And through that process, if they identify that you haven't done your due diligence with your IT, it could have a negative impact on how much you could recover through your insurance policy as well too. The last thing I would say for folks out there is, IT, just like your subcontractor relationships are not necessarily set it and forget it. Vendor risk management with the technology that you're utilizing is crucial in ensuring that the folks who are touching your information for your business are doing what they say they're doing. So back earlier here, I talked about governance and business environment, where I said, you need to be handling these particular things. Well, you need to reach out and ensure an audit to some degree that your vendors, your managed service provider or your cloud provider has done the steps to ensure that they're safeguarding their environment that has your data in it. So vendor risk management is another crucial thing that you should be taking a look at. And if that's not necessarily in your wheelhouse, find a partnership with a firm that can help you to vet these IT vendors and ask the questions that you may not know. So, all of this stuff that we're talking about is defensive early here in the beginning, but an organization's business objectives clearly are not based off of defense, right? You proactively go out and grow revenue and business. Growing and adapting is critical to, what you're trying to achieve. So we talked about policy like a disaster recovery. You should be looking at your acceptable use policy, your asset management, but more important than just checking a box and saying that you have a policy. Policy needs action, and that action requires you to not only manage it through governance, but walk your talk, right? And that starts from the top down and from the bottom up. Cybersecurity as a culture is one of the biggest things that I've been talking about lately, whether it be with folks in the defense industrial base or it be organizations in construction. You need to be able to have defined trigger points that and behaviors that match up with the policies and procedures that you set in place to safeguard. Are you going through your disaster recovery on a quarterly basis? If an incident happens, does your entire team know what the next steps are? Do you contact your attorney or your trusted incident response team? What's the contact cadence with your insurance company? And then the next thing that probably can help distill it all and make it simple for you is utilize a framework. So here at Ray Cyber Services, Ray and Associates, we are a NIST focused organization. So we utilize the NIST cybersecurity framework that has five functions that are really simple for folks to kind of understand around identify, protect, respond, recovery, or identify, protect, detect, respond, and recovery, right? Make sure that when you do that and you use that framework, you're utilizing it in a way that matches with your company culture and what's driving your business objectives. I always like to tell people that, to get things really moving and driving in the right direction, it's really about head, heart, and hand. And so, what knowledge do you have? Does your organization have the will and the culture to drive what needs to happen? And have you ongoingly created this culture of continuous learning so that people are learning the skills and things like that? Folks in my industry will always tell you that the end user is the weakest point. But in the end, if you build a culture around that, they become an additional sensor for you that software will never, ever be able to potentially replace. So if they see something, say something, reach out to folks in your IT team and your leadership and make corrections as needed. And then the last thing I would say to you that with no matter what the solution that you choose, there is no one-stop shop for ransom or malware protection, antivirus, endpoint. Culture is really what drives everything around your cyber initiatives in your company.
Thank you, Ty and Lacey. Look forward to hearing from you. I know before we get started, real quickly, we were talking before the presentation and over the past couple of weeks or so, and we're all aware that I think the number of incidents, the number of cyber incidents, continues to grow. But you shared something with me that I was a little bit surprised about, and that is that not only the incidents themselves, but the impact for companies along those lines it continues to increase as well. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, we're seeing a steady increase, unfortunately, in downtime, and we'll get into that a little bit. But cyber liability poses a lot of risks to organizations. If you could jump to the next slide, please. So, the core things that I hear from almost every client is reputation, obviously protecting it, not having these public incidents and having the mistrust from clients and vendors and things like that. Obviously, an incident is going to affect the financial position of an organization, and then there's regulatory implications as well. Cyber insurance and cybersecurity is a really true testament to the resiliency of an organization. So focusing on those areas is really imperative. Next slide, please. So, some of the focus areas and some of the key coverage grants are also in alignment. So safeguarding client information. If you do have an incident policy, you're essentially purchasing an outsourced disaster recovery plan when you purchase a cyber liability policy. It's going to help you navigate things from a regulatory standpoint. It's also going to handle all that notification and how many years you have to do it. And each state has its own rules and legislation that you need to comply with, attorney generals, et cetera. So it's a patchwork. There are some things like HIPAA that are obviously are in addition to any state or regulatory, but it's complicated, I guess, just to really kind of dive into there. And then we've got emerging risks like biometric laws in certain states. So facial recognition, fingerprints, as we make buildings more secure, how are we tracking that information? What kind of consents are we getting? Things like that. So this new technology obviously opens us up to different areas of concern. And then, California Consumer Privacy Act, it continues to expand, even if you don't, and it really also goes back to where the person is located, not necessarily where your organization is located. So, you could be in Ohio, but maybe you have clients in California, or if you have employees, et cetera. Those are all implications that you could be pulled into. Obviously, business continuity is a huge issue. If you're suffering from ransomware or cyber liability incident, you're most likely not going to be able to service clients or do the things that you normally do. And then, as I mentioned before, reputation. Oftentimes in the construction industry, you're signing NDAs, confidentiality agreements. If you have a cyber liability, is that going to open you up to liability for the release of that information? So there's a lot of aspects of the policy that would cover those various areas. Next slide, please. So we are seeing a huge increase in both frequency of claims and the severity as well. And typically, and I would say from 2018 to 2020, we saw almost a 1,000% increase in the actual extortion demands. So what does that mean to insurance? Well, it means their costs are increasing for the insurance carriers. It is not uncommon for an extortion demand to come in at $2 million, even for a smaller organization. So their carriers are paying more for claims, and oftentimes they're limit losses. So as a result, we're starting to see a huge loss ratio in cyber liability, and we're starting to see some carriers use things like co-insurance with ransomware or with the dependent business interruption. And that's up to 50%. So if you had a loss, you would be responsible for 50% of that limit. So if it's $1 million, that's $500,000 that you're responsible for. Now that's not every carrier, but there are some that are utilizing that. We're seeing rate increases anywhere from 40 to 100%. Historically, there's been no rate increases. Anything would be purely based on exposure or claims experience. So you know, that's a new trend, and that's been pretty, that's been a difficult conversation recently. New exclusions. So SolarWinds exclusions we're starting to see on some policies. A lot of questions around Microsoft Exchange. There are some specific questions of end-of-life technology, legacy technology. A lot of questions around micro-segmentation and how are you protecting any old tech or old technology or legacy software that can't be patched. How are you protecting the rest of your network from that? We're seeing a limitation on dependent business interruption as well. And then we're seeing a very rigorous underwriting process, exhaustive questionnaires, and additional supplementals based on responses. And the carriers are also starting to use either their own proprietary scanning technology, or they're using services like Security Scorecard or BitSight, and they are scanning their clients. And typically, as part of your policy, you may be asked to remediate several things before they'll even consider binding coverage. And I would say probably most significant is the insurance industry as a whole shifting to now requiring multi-factor authentication. And for anyone who's not familiar with multi-factor authentication, it's essentially, you probably use it every day and you're just not really aware of what it's called, but it would be you know, facial recognition with your iPhone, passcodes, something like that, a second form of authentication. So it's your password and something in addition. So we're starting to see that requirement. And for email, that's really obvious, but we're also seeing it for remote access, both from any apps and also, you know, through a VPN, something like that. And then also within your network. So any kind of privileged access also requiring multi-factor authentication. Next slide, please.
Lacey, real quick, you talked about, you know, that underwriting process being so much more rigorous, and it almost sounds like in some cases that scanning by the carrier, it's really like a mini security audit. It sounds like. Is that kind of a fair way from a layman's perspective to term that?
Yeah, it's a non-invasive scan. So they're simply scanning your internet-facing infrastructure. But I can tell you that sometimes if I'm talking to carriers and maybe they haven't even received my submission, they're scanning companies, and if their scan isn't a certain number, it doesn't matter what the explanation is or what the application looks like. It could be an automatic declination. So the carriers are really leaning on those scans. And I know some clients of mine actually use resources like Security Scorecard or BitSight. I'm sure there are some others out there. I'm just not familiar with the names, but they use them to actually monitor the overall health of their vendors as well. So if you see their numbers declining pretty steadily, usually that's a good indicator that things aren't going as they should, or they may have an incident going on. So carriers are starting to employ the same tools just because just trying to manage the losses really, and trying to determine the best risk profiles for their clients.
And Ty, from our perspective, I mean, obviously that's one of the things, you know, engaging a cyber services team does is help assess that, you know, and prepare for that underwriting process and get you in the best shape, you know, before you go through that, right?
Definitely. You know, when we are working with a client, we utilize some tools as well too, where we go in and do a vulnerability scan that helps us to identify equipment on the network and make sure that they have the latest and greatest operational systems in place. But we really are data driven and data focused. So we have a tool that allows us to go in and identify where information and data lies in that network. And also identifies if there are unknown, what they call, some folks call shadow IT cloud services that are being used out there. And we can quantify that for them in dollars and cents, right? Whether it be social security information or credit card information. And it never ceases to amaze me about how surprised folks are around their cyber hygiene when they realize that they have $100,000, $9 million of information, that the value that it has and rated by an insurance company, rated by what it would be worth on the dark web. So, those are eye openers.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, a trend that we saw during 2020, and it's just continuing into 2021, is exfiltration of data. So if they do gain access to your network, they're also stealing it because they're trying to circumnavigate recovering from backups and then refusing to pay. So usually they're stealing your information, and we've seen this play out in the news where sensitive information is being disclosed. So it's certainly a very scary time, I guess, to say the least. So the average number of days a ransom incident lasts, and actually, this data is from CoveWare. It's 21 days, but that was as of Q4 of 2020. The most recent, which actually just was released this morning, it's now 23 days. So, and then I think in Q3 of 2020 it was 19 days. So as you can see, we're really trending in the wrong direction. And CoveWare, they're a ransomware negotiation firm, and if anyone's interested in it, they've got some really interesting statistics they track, and they handle over 150 ransomware incidents a month. So they've got a lot of data points, and they're dealing with a lot of these bad threat actors. Next slide, please. And I think too, one of the things to also consider, the extortion event itself, if an organization goes through it, if you do pay, you're typically maybe only a quarter to a third of the way through an incident. That downtime, it takes a while to actually either recover. We oftentimes find that the decryption process, or restoring from backups, there may be devices that are completely corrupted. Sometimes I have clients that have had to purchase additional storage space to preserve their data too. So a lot of times that downtime is really the most dangerous complications of a cyber liability incident, because you're also not able to service your clients or customers as you normally would. So what can you do to prepare? And these are all things too that I think are important for just in business in general, but as your renewal is coming up for cyber liability, or if you're looking to get coverage in place, you want to make sure that your network is secured, fully encrypted information at rest and transit, your backups are encrypted, your laptops are encrypted, all these things. And then multi-factor authentication. I already talked about this, but I really cannot emphasize it enough. It's almost getting to the point where you're almost uninsurable if you don't have multi-factor authentication. And we also saw that nearly all of the cyber incidents that we had last year, most of them didn't have multi-factor authentication in place. So it's one of those things where it's really kind of the basic blocking and tackling as the carriers are seeing it. And think about it, sprinklers in the building, almost multi-factor authentication is very similar. So incident response plans, business continuity plans, they're really important. It's a playbook, right? We have fire drills in school for a reason. So, testing it and making sure that everybody knows their process, who's the backups, if they're on vacation, who's the decision maker. And the carriers are also looking for your incident response plan to specifically address ransomware. So, that typically isn't terribly difficult, I don't think, to add in, but, if you haven't done a tabletop in a while, it's a good way to test your incident response plan. Also, keep a hard copy. If you're completely locked out of your computer, you're not going to be able to get to your incident response plan. And then we also see a lot of issues still around social engineering fraud. They're very good at manipulating third parties to release funds. And unfortunately, we see a lot of this. The FBI Internet Crimes Report that came out recently, I think it was $4.1 trillion were stolen last year. It's a huge amount of money, and that's the reported number. I'm sure that number probably is much higher. So definitely use caution with wire transfers, and it's probably best if there's a change request just to pick up the phone and call the number on file, not the one in the email. And then there's a lot of scrutiny on data backup and storage and around encryption. Next slide, please. So this is probably one of the areas where we find clients stumble in the event of a situation. So notification, you want to make sure that you notify your insurance carrier at the beginning, as soon as possible, because they're really there to be a resource. And typically there are panel requirements, so you need to bring them in if there is a situation. This sounds kind of basic, but refrain from using your business email because they may still be in it and they may be monitoring your email. So just refrain from it. You want to preserve the data too, because we need to determine afterwards what information was potentially accessed and what those requirements are really. And obviously with legal consent and discussions, contacting the FBI, disconnect all devices from network, and then understand how your policy works. So who do you need to call? Bring your broker in. Typically your cyber liability policy has what's called a breach coach, which is just a really fancy term for a privacy focused attorney. But they're going to be basically the quarterback. They're going to help with IT forensics and the messaging, crisis management. And then it's also important to utilize them because of privilege. And you want to make sure that any of that information is protected by attorney-client privilege. So I'm sure, Ty, you probably have a few things that you would add here as well.
I would definitely, you've hit on all the high notes, right? That disaster recovery incident response plan is really critical here. And just to reiterate what you said, you want to run through it periodically. You want to tabletop it and practice it before the event happens. It's not a matter of if something's going to happen to you. The reality in this environment is when. And it's important to have a cadence and understand how that communication rolls out. And like Lacey said, you're reaching out to your insurance agent, you're reaching out to your legal counsel, and hopefully they wind up being your point person for communications with FBI or Department of Homeland Services or your local legal state services like the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigations. Those things are really kind of crucial in a cadence of ensuring that, one, potentially the chain of custody of the information stays safe, but then two, the quicker you can move through it, the quicker you might be able to resolve the issue with minimal impact to your organization.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Next slide, please. So, and I really can't emphasize this enough, but prompt reporting is crucial. Typically policies have language, soon as practicable, as soon as a member of the control group becomes aware, but sometimes it's even broader, it could be any insured. So, and this is one of the few times that we find issues in claims. Maybe a client decides to handle everything themselves and then turn in an invoice. Typically these policies are duty to defend. So the carrier needs to be involved from the beginning and really needs to be working in, alongside the client. So making sure that you're in compliance is really where your broker comes into play. And then who do you want to work with? You don't want to find out at the time of an incident that you can't work with the attorney that's helped you craft your incident response plan. And they have the expertise, but maybe they're not on the panel. Or same thing for your cybersecurity vendor. Things like that. So it's important to have those conversations ahead of time, understand who you'd want to work with, maybe even get those MSAs out of the way and get those handled. And then oftentimes we find that multiple policies can be affected by a claim. So it could be crime coverage, it could be a D&O, et cetera. So you want to make sure that you're looking at all your policies.
That's really great advice. And for those of you out there, I don't want to assume that everybody knows all the acronyms. MSA, your master service agreements, right? you clearly, you need to know what's in there. We are in a society, Lacey, as well as I do, sometimes when things pop up for my privacy on my iPhone, I just click, click, click. Even me, the cyber guy, right? Versus, and then I go back and I reflect and I'm thinking to myself, man, that wasn't very smart. So then I request the email version so I can then go through and read it. It makes good nighttime reading. But the reality is you need to know what those master service agreements are. Like I shared in my part of the presentation, you don't want those to be situations that are shockers or eye openers to you in the moment of crisis.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, thank you, Lacey and Ty both. please submit any questions in the chat if you have them, and we'll get to those. But while we wait for that, I thought we'd get some commentary from each of the panelists. So, John, obviously in your role being out in the market and in front of clients and prospective clients as much as you are, what are you seeing around those conversations that take place related to cyber? Because you're more on the front end of it. You're asking those folks, hey, how well are you prepared? What have you done? Where do you see companies right now, kind of initially when you first broach the subject?
I think Lacey hit on it briefly when she kind of referenced sprinklers in the building. I think having safety programs, and I'm speaking, I guess, specifically more towards the construction industry, because that was kind of our focus today. But I think OSHA safety programs, the Fair Labor Standards Act and wage and hour issues and how that works with employment practices. And we've seen a lot of kind of escalation in that area as well due to COVID, really. But from a understanding of how your cyber policy responds, whether you have coverage, I think unfortunately a lot of times what we'll find and what we do a lot of times is doing an upfront audit of whatever cyber coverage is in place or whatever cyber coverage the company thinks is in place. A lot of times, I think Lacey alluded to this as well, is there's an assumption maybe that one of their other policies are going to respond, or that they have enough limit where when you pay a ransom demand and then you're basically out of coverage for any type of business continuity. I think those are the things that asking those appropriate questions, understanding that do you have the flexibility to work with the vendors that you want to, much like with any other insurance policy, it's just a piece of paper until you need to use it, right? And it's having control, having the ability to navigate these unfortunate issues with experts. Really, I think Lacey, the beauty, I guess, of Oswald being and not to give you a full-blown commercial here, but being an employee-owned Ohio-based company is we invest in resources. Lacey is our cyber strategic leader for our entire company. She does support our design and construction practice, I think significantly due to the needs that we've found in that space. But having somebody who really understands that rather than somebody who can potentially place a policy for you for a year until maybe you're uninsurable, unfortunately, is going to be critical as it doesn't seem as though this is getting any better, I think is the unfortunate circumstance we're in.
No, to that point, Jonathan, I would say that ransomware is the new money generator, in essence, the new mafia of the world, right? And the Verizon data breach report and stuff like that will tell you that it's been on the rise for many, many years now. It's going to continue, for as little as a couple $1,000s. If I'm not an experienced hacker, I can buy some software and then try to deploy it against some of these organizations. And if I can get 0.1% of money out of 25% of the people that I hit, it's a lucrative business for the threat actors.
And we oftentimes see it too, especially construction clients and really clients of all different industry sizes, but contracts are requiring you to carry cyber liability too. And you have to look at what they're asking for, because sometimes it's just not possible, or they're asking for very high limit. So paying close attention to those contracts is really very important, and making sure that you're in compliance with them. And then how long do you need to keep it in place? There's a lot of nuances to it. And then also who you're sharing your data with as well. We find that you could have very good controls, and you may have all those bells and whistles, but if you're working with the vendor that has an incident, you're going to be responsible for it. And I mentioned earlier the NDAs, but there is that liability that you're taking on when you're taking confidential information of others or plans or sensitive information. So making sure that you're safeguarding it, but then you're protecting yourself if something happens.
I think that's a great point, Lacey. And, one of the things that we continue to see, particularly in the construction space, is the interconnectedness of all the parties involved in a specific job or contract. And, when you think through all of that and the, various avenues that those threat actors might have to not only get to you and your company, but all of those others that you're doing business with, it's best to be as prepared and as protected as you can. Just like as John mentioned, your safety measures and all those other things, you have to think of this in the same way. And that for a lot of folks, that's newer. This has only arisen and really become more prevalent in the last certainly 4 or 5 years or so, particularly down market, where most of us deal with companies that might be, it doesn't matter if you're 5 million a year, 50 million a year, 100 million a year, you're prime targets now. So that's the scary part. Well, I know we're bumping up against time here, and certainly appreciate everybody else's time as well. And you have contact information here on this final slide, as well as the slide deck, which is available to you. So please feel free to reach out to any of the folks you heard today with additional questions or follow-up. And thanks again to both Oswald and Ray and Associates for co-hosting today's event, and specifically to John and Ty and Lacey. So we hope we've been able to provide you with some valuable insight in regards to best practices and potential solutions. And we will follow up, I believe, with a survey as well. And again, feel free to reach out to us with any individual questions that you might have. So thank you again, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Awesome. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah.